Hey, I'm singer-songwriter, producer Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 8, Episode 26 of Music is Not a Genre. Do it with me.
I am Scott J.
Scott.
What?
I'll introduce you, okay?
No.
Just give me a second. Okay.
No bogue, man. No bogue.
And you know what? Let's forget it. You know the MxG. You know, if you don't know how to do the hand gestures by now, then you maybe need to go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre and watch the videos. And even though I know that's in the mid-roll, I'm saying that right now because this week's topic is the unnaturally long history of jam bands, and it features a guest, as you heard. I have a guest expert on, and please, Scott, just wait for a second. Scott Blaze, who's going to help me kind of flesh out some of the jam band stuff since that's not really my scene. And so if you want to see Scott, then you got to go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre, and you can also see me sweat in this room with no AC. And as my shirt says, whatever. So yes, that is the topic. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. I'll leave everything to the mid-roll except for like, share, subscribe, rate, review, and please tell one person about this podcast. Word of mouth and all of those things that I listed there, they do more than anything else, really, to help support indie creators. And speaking of which, the mid-roll also gives you other ways which to support this show and my band Rec. And speaking of my band Rec, I just recently posted all 14 music videos for Kite to Camden at youtube.com/@recbandnyc. Please go there. It also includes a 15th video, which is the full album, all the 14 videos strung together to create a story. It's kind of like a short film, honestly. People who have seen it call it psychedelic. And it has many elements to it, but that is part of it. So please go there, youtube.com/@recbandnyc. Subscribe and watch the new 14 new Rec videos. That's it for the kind of clerical stuff here. Let's get back to the topic, which is the unnaturally long history of jam bands, featuring Scott Blaze. Don't say anything, Scott, please. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so I have been tangentially connected to jam bands my entire life. I think that as part of a curious musician, let's say. Not every musician necessarily needs to learn about everything, but I've been somebody who's always been interested in learning about all kinds of music and wanted to get bands together, and having gotten bands together since I was a teen, if not before, and, you know, kind of working with other musicians, you kind of understand the idea of jamming. Because, as I'll explain later, that's kind of an important part of being a good musician, at least to a degree. But I have never really been a fan of jam band music. Certain songs, etc. But no, you wouldn't call me a fan. I've never really seen a show like that, etc. But recent events, including the death of Bob Weir and others, and some colleagues discussing jam bands more frequently in the context of a new scene emerging, which we'll talk about, have compelled me to dig deeper into this. I have been planning this for a very long time. Partly because it was very hard to wrangle this guest here, Scott Blaze. Scott, just don't say anything yet. And partly because it's a lot of research. There's a lot of research. And so the subtitle, The Unnaturally Long History of Jam Bands, is a play on words for 3 reasons. One, jam music is often considered very long. So that's number one. The history itself is longer than you will realize. And the what is the third thing? Oh, yes. This podcast episode itself is probably going to be longer than my average podcast episodes. In fact, for only the third time in MxG history, and now it's time, so stay awake. I am going to introduce, I have a special guest contributor. Everyone, please say hello to Scott Blaze.
It's my turn. Yeah, all right. I am Scott J. Blaze, and welcome to my show. Let's get right into it. We're going to start.
Scott, excellent. Very good. That's enough for now. We are going to continue. You've got plenty of time here to, give your opinions and talk and give your expertise.
Yeah, that's true.
So the show format, a prehistory that as usual goes back way farther than you would think. History of jam bands proper, broken down into 4 major eras, and we'll talk about that later. Conclusions, including my favorite jam bands from each era, the featured song, questions, and the bonus MxTRA, which I'm pretty much equally excited about, is jam band music is loved and hated for the same reasons. And I'm going to go over the components that go into good jam music. And I'll explain how that goes even farther than that in the bonus MxTRA at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, and describe how jam band's strengths are also its weaknesses. And that's why the same exact components go into so many people loving it and so many people hating it. Sources: Google, Wikipedia, Reddit, word-detective.com, jambands.com, YouTube, Instagram. Another contributor to this podcast, Steve Erickson, who provided some information for me and some suggestions. And of course, Scott Blaze right here, who we'll get to in a second, please. Disclaimers: I'm going to miss a bunch of bands. You know I will. We are going to miss bands. Sorry, Scott. I will be biased, especially this episode. I've never been a huge fan or aficionado, so I'm coming at this fairly objectively, but with some knowledge of, the general idea of jam bands and jam music, which is, again, why Scott is here to provide more of an insider view, and I will absolutely be waking him up to do that shortly. But for now, let's get into the prehistory. Yes, as usual, I'm going back way further in history than you might predict, and probably further than anyone else would on a topic like this.
You talking about like 1990?
No. Yeah, way further than 1990.
Really?
Absolutely. You will see how much further back, but that's pretty, that's good. Good thinking, kind of. Of course, the main element of jam bands is that they jam. And later on, I'll talk about the origin of that word, as well as a comprehensive definition of what a jam band is, and to a degree is not. There's a spectrum there. But for now, and to help put this prehistory in context, I will just quickly define jamming as...
Dude, Nick, I got this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it. Of course. Why would I even try? Go ahead.
Jamming means to jam, like to jam out. To jam out, man. To sit deep in that pocket and then jam. Jam.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Sure. Yes, absolutely one kind of valid definition of jam bands. Scott, excellent. Thank you. And I will elaborate on that. I will add to it. I will and it by defining jamming as one or more musicians getting together to play a spontaneous, extended improv, usually but not always as a departure from some kind of structure.
That's exactly what I said, dude.
Yes, exactly what you said as well. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, let's get to this prehistory. I'm breaking this down into a combination of eras and elements, and that this is, again, the prehistory, before jam bands existed. So the proto-jam era and element, number one, folk and communal music traditions, from ancient times to, let's just say, pre-Renaissance, although these are all kind of fluid. The element here is, and these elements are the things that go into eventually making jam bands and jam music. This element is live music, and the audience are co-conspirators in creating this music. That's a big part of it. And that's from the dawn of... Before the dawn of classical music as we know it, very little music was written down. Gregorian chants and the odd melody here and there we've discovered. It was passed on through oral tradition and simply live playing. Since histories rely on extant sources, we lean too heavily on these scant written songs, forgetting that live was really the only game in town for thousands of years. People didn't really rely that much on the written notes, nor could most of the people read those written notes. So live was kind of the only game in town. And moreover, that it very much included improvising and riffing, likely from the very beginning. It's how it started. I mean, if nothing musically existed before the first person did music, the first thing that happened was an improv, right? So all of music stems from improv, you could say. Examples of music we know today that have its roots in ancient times: Celtic dance music, Appalachian fiddle traditions, West African griot traditions, Indian classical performance traditions, Middle Eastern makam traditions, which I talked a bit about in my Israeli and Palestinian episodes of the podfasts. You can glean how a modern jam band fan following a tour to hear unique versions of songs resembles older folk traditions more than modern pop fandom, and the idea that those musicians would go from town to town playing, and sometimes people would follow them, right? Proto-jam era And element number 2, classical improvisers. And this is, let's say, loosely from the 1500s to the 1800s, although, again, all of these extend into the modern day, really. The element here is freedom within form is legitimized. So many people forget that classical music was once highly improvisational. One thing I learned in college that I did not actually forget and that blew me away was the fact that improv was a part of classical music from the beginning. Because again, we rely so much on the written notes that we forget that. It helped me make the connection between the classical and jazz eras and like third stream music and things like that. Did an episode on it, illustrating that the idea of improv didn't just spring up from nothing, nor did it just relegate itself to folk traditions. This also helps to legitimize the idea of improv, especially against those purists who claim that only precisely written and performed music is worthy of respect. Some notable figures: Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, G. I named so many obscure composers there, but the point being that those composers allowed for some improv in things like cadenzas. Variations on a theme stem from improv. Entire fugues could have been improv in performance. Audiences often attended specifically to hear what a performer would invent in the moment. This is why people like Franz Liszt were superstars. That rock star presence and virtuosity and unpredictability far predates the modern era. The eventual shift towards strict fidelity to written scores in the late 19th and early 20th centuries actually moved classical music away from something that looked surprisingly jam-like. And since that was the last classical era we remember, we assume in hindsight that that's how all classical eras were. Not true. Proto-jam era element number 3, minstrel, folk, and dance hall, which we're calling this the 1800s because, of course, a lot of that existed long before, but that was kind of the revival. There was a real strengthening of all of that. And the element here is the revival type gathering with folk music and dance. Very important element of jam bands. America developed a culture of social music making through fiddle contests, riverboat entertainment, dance halls, string bands. Philly, the Mummers Parade, a lot of string bands. Musicians often played the same tunes for extended periods while varying arrangements and solos. This clearly stemmed from that pre-classical folk tradition, helped create the musical DNA that later fed blues, country, jazz, bluegrass, and eventually jam bands. All of those fed jam bands. Note, though, that, of course, the folk tradition continued straight through and beyond the classical era. I'm just, again, delineating for the purposes of illustrating how jamming pervaded quite different musical forms and traditions contemporaneously. Proto-jam era element number 4 in our prehistory, blues and ragtime. We'll say the 1880s and the 1920s, generally speaking. And the element here is the modern structure of jamming together. So some key figures: W.C. Handy, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Robert Johnson. Again, I'm not naming obscure people, just giving you examples of the kind of people who did this and who popularized it. The important developments here were that the song structures existed but were flexible. There was a call and response to the playing between musicians and often the audience. There were improvised solos, very, very important here, and performers adapting songs nightly. So no one version of the song was the same. The 12-bar blues would become one of the foundational frameworks for rock eventually, although not right away, but eventually, and jam improvisation. When many of us think of musical improv, we most often gravitate towards what? Jazz. And for good reason. That handed-down tradition of allowing for solos and collective improvising over the kind of music we now think of as jazz started in this era and is directly and vitally connected to the origins of all modern jazz and jam music in general. Proto-jam era element number 5, jazz, 1920s, 1950s, is considered kind of the jazz era. Again, of course, it's existed long after that. The element here is the jazz mindset, which to me is having fun with the music, and we'll get to the origin of the word jam there is related to that, but taking the improv job seriously. That's the combination of those two things. Very important element. We're getting perilously close to the direct origins of jam bands now. So early jazz, people like Louis Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton, developed collective improvisation and soloing traditions. Then you had the swing era with Duke Ellington, Count Basie, etc. They regularly stretched arrangements in their live performances. Bebop, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, so many, forget it. I mean, that's when improvisation became the central event. A modern jam band solo and the structure of a jam performance in general owe as much to bebop's philosophy as to rock. So a big element. The other thing that was firmly established in this era was the use of the word jam itself, as follows. Jam in music emerged in the 1920s in African-American jazz slang. A jam session originally referred to an informal gathering where musicians improvised. It likely evolved from earlier slang like jam up, meaning excellent or top notch. So that's one version of what it meant. Or figuratively to the feeling of notes jamming together in tight spaces, using that pile-on or pressure sense of jam to describe the effect of many musicians playing together. So many musicians and many notes without a score. So that's the second definition or coloring of jam. Let's say connotation. No one knows for sure why an improv performance or informal session by a music group is called a jam session. And it may be invoking one of those two, or it may invoke the use of jam in the sense of jelly, jamming together fruit to make a pulp. So it's kind of the same as that second definition. That's from the 18th century. But it also might mean something sweet. Oh, that's the jam. That's the good stuff. Very nice treat. And we say like, oh, that's not my jam. That doesn't just mean that's not my kind of music, but that's not my thing. That's not the thing I enjoy. So if you consider the ideas of the jam up being a slang term meaning great, which is the jam, right? Jam meaning jelly, meaning the sweet thing, or jam meaning putting all the notes together. That's where they kind of get what possibly might be the origin of the word jam as used in music.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the problem with that is I am not into jam. The food. Yeah, I'm much more of a peanut butter and fluffernutter. Jam is just not my thing.
Wow. Yeah, honestly, that is a surprise. That is a bit. And oddly enough, that's exactly what I like too. I will eat jam. But much prefer peanut butter pretty much anywhere, anytime. But if you're going to do it in a sandwich, I'm a fluff guy. So some common ground here, Scott. Anyway, proto-jam element era number 6. Modal and exploratory jazz in the 50s and 60s. The element here, the vibe. As important as all the other elements that I've mentioned so far. If first you need the idea of improv to establish the jam band format on the musical side. Second, and maybe equally important, you need the jam band vibe and aesthetic. And this is the era where that truly started. Miles Davis, Coltrane, Ornette Coleman, Kind of Blue, of course. And I mentioned all the I Love Supreme. That feature long-form improv, modal vamps, open-ended structures. There's the spiritual and communal audience experiences. They were there for the vibe as much as anything else. A Coltrane concert from that era often has more in common structurally and spiritually and vibely with a 1995 Phish show than with a typical rock concert.
Did you just say vibely?
Yes.
That's brilliant, because it's exactly what I feel all the time.
That just came out of my mouth.
Vibely.
Thank you. Of course, let's not dance around pole on this one. A lot of this mindset came from altered states, alcohol, and especially drugs. And for the first time in this podcast, I'm going to deliberately hand it over to Scott. I hope you're ready to tell you all about that. Scott, take it away. Scott, are you awake?
Yep.
Okay, so why don't you talk about the drug element of this kind of music here? Just go ahead. Use your preferred words. Reefer, jube, Maui Wowie, chronic, sweet leaf, whatever it is that you will say. I can accept that now. So I understand the way you convey your expertise. And go.
I got you, dude. Jube. Jube. All right. I'm going to riff. Drugs have been part of jam band culture largely because improvisation itself emerged from scenes where altered perception and extended performance went hand in hand. In the mid-century jazz era, cats like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie were central to a culture where late-night sets, urban nightlife, and heavy substance use often overlap with radical musical experimentation. I hear that, and I'm here for it. While it's reductive to say drugs caused the innovation, they were part of an environment that pushed endurance, risk-taking, and boundary-breaking forms of improvisation. By the time psychedelic rock and the Grateful Dead era emerged, steal your face! That relationship shifted into a more overt cultural identity. LSD experimentation helped reframe live performance as an exploratory, often communal experience rather than fixed reproduction of recorded material. In modern jam band culture, drug use is less a driving musical mechanism and more an inherited association with the scene's history of expanded consciousness, long-form improvisation, and countercultural identity, though the music itself ultimately stands independent of any one influence or substance.
Whoa. Nice work.
Riff.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, sleeping again, but actually very surprisingly cohesive and concise and covered a lot there. More than anything, this promotes the central jam band idea of exploration. And we'll get into the kind of drug element a little bit more in the conclusions as to whether or not that's a necessary thing, et cetera, et cetera. Now, shifting to a different but related strain, we're going to...
Wait, what strain, man? You talking sour diesel, bubble kush, wedding cake? Wedding cake. Wedding cake.
Drug, humor. Okay. Anyway, we're going to get into the next proto-jam era and element. Number 7, folk revival and bluegrass, which is the 40s to the 60s was kind of when that was happening, although, again, loose. The element here is the down-home aesthetic. Important figures like Bill Monroe, Doc Watson. Traits were instrumental breaks, so, which is virtuosic soloing often, or just, not even without a solo. Those live variation for sure. And big one, devoted touring audiences. Big one right there. Bluegrass festivals became an important precursor to jam band festivals. Why? So you had the jazz improv element in place, then you had that vibe come in, and this kind of music scene added in the country folk kind of unassuming lack of polish and pretension, down-home feel that created the reason why people would follow the bands, which is that another big element here. And that all jam bands, partake of this in some way.
Yeah. Partake of.
Use the word partake. Okay. Direct pre-jam era element. And this is, I think, the last one before we get to the actual history, and that is psychedelic rock, the kind of late 60s, basically. And the element here is rock instrumentation. It's the final bridge. Rock enters the jam picture for sort of the first time. Let's not forget that proto-rock forms like jump blues and rockabilly all allowed for improv from time to time, somewhat on recording, especially in performance. But the idea of rock being a prime place for jamming, it took a few years to take hold, and this is when it would have happened in the late 60s, a big time. You had bands like Jefferson Airplane and that whole San Francisco scene, as well as Zappa from that, and people from that experimental avant weird side, and I will go into Zappa a bit again later. Some new ingredients: the rock instrumentation, jazz improvisation within rock, that LSD era exploration, countercultural community. So now all the elements are in place for jam bands, which brings us to the dawning of jam bands. But before we get to that, before we get to the history, let's answer this question. And that question is, what is a jam band?
Again, Nick, dude, I got this. What is jam?
Okay.
That's why you brought me here. That's why I dressed up for this. Jam, or the formal term is jamming, is when guys, and I've heard ladies as well, gather up instruments and play together, kind of going off on whatever, whenever, and then coming back from the zone and saying, oh, you're here too. We were just vibing and I totally forgot that you were on stage with like 7 other people. Oh my God, you're like really close to me. And then usually one of the musicians stops and tells a story or plays like one string for 8 minutes. But I was heading to the can around that time, so I think I may have missed something, or I could have imagined it while I was talking to the person next to me who was not next to me. I'm not even sure. Jam.
All right. So we got that. We got the essence of that. We got a real whiff of that. Thank you, Scott. Thank you very much. Let me go into my version of what's the definition of jam band. So, a band whose performances are built around extended collective improvisation with songs serving as flexible frameworks rather than fixed compositions. The key here is that there is no one genre that defines a jam band. You're going to see that when we get into the different jam band phases here, despite the Dead and Phish being the big ones everyone thinks of, and a couple of others that came along since then. That's not the only genre for jam band. People assume that that's what all jam music sounds like. You can be a jam band in any genre. You're going to actually love all the genres that I mentioned. As you'd expect me to say, a jam band really isn't a genre at all. It's an aesthetic and a philosophy of performance. And in fact, in the bonus MxTRA, patreon.com/music's not a genre, I go into why jam band approach is a philosophy of music in general and of even life and all of art. This is a belief that a song is never truly finished, that every concert is another chance to rework it or to add to it, where most musicians treat the studio recording as the destination and the end. That's definitely me. And the live show as a reproduction. Jam bands reverse that. The recording becomes the blueprint, just one kind of version of it, and the concert becomes the real work of art. That's why wildly diverse bands can all belong to the same scene despite sharing few stylistic traits. They're united not by what they sound like, but by a commitment to collective improvisation, risk, and the idea that music is something to be discovered in real time rather than, listened to in the exact same recording over and over forever, or simply repeated as the recording is. I really enjoy improv and jamming when it comes up, and it comes up more frequently than you would think in playing structured music in kind of the Rex music or other bands that I'm in, cover bands. But I never consider jamming the goal or the thing itself. That's where I differ philosophically. More just a way to enjoy playing, to very, very much explore new ideas, and to learn how to vibe with fellow musicians. All vital, all of that, but more a part of my process and not my end game.
Which is why I'm bringing you the good shit today, my dude. You need to untwangle your mental scrotum and let the moon shine in.
Thank you, Scott. So the main characteristics of what makes a jam band: collective improv, extended performances with no fixed time limit per song. Songs are both frameworks and suggestions, depending how you weigh it. Micro repetition, yes. Macro repetition, no. Every show and set list and iteration of a song is different. That's where the macro is not repetition. But within a song or a set, there's repetition, there's callback. There's theme and variation. So there's a combination of repetition and everything being brand new. Risk and failure are part of the joy, and live is more important than recorded, except when you're talking about bootlegs, which we'll get
Barton
into.
Hall 77 Primo.
Yeah, no idea what he's talking about. I don't know a lot about what's considered the best bootlegs for any band. Anyway, but that's why you're here, Scott. That's why you're here. Which, by the way, I heard on that History of Rock Music in 500 Songs that the bootleg tape trading culture is one of the main things that got the internet and the World Wide Web off the ground. People needing to find a way to share it without having to get together. They wanted it more quickly and all of that stuff. And online music. And again, another element, new songs can form during and in between established songs. Some bands like to segue between songs by just continuing to play And I love that feel. When I create an album, and I've done it a couple times, where songs connect with each other, that idea of how they're going to connect has created new ideas that have become songs. And finally, the audience affects the performance far more than other forms. Non-jam bands can and do jam, but if their main mode of expression is not predominantly jam, then they're just playing in the form, kind of playing with it, but not jam band. You know, ironically, Pearl Jam, it's a great example of this. They have jam in the freaking name, and their fans are known for sharing bootlegs of their live shows, just like for jam bands, because Pearl Jam does actually jam quite a lot live. Yet they are not considered a jam band, and despite some questionable entries on this Wikipedia page I discovered of over 250 jam bands, they aren't on that list. An interesting omission considering some of the bands that are on that list. And why? Well, in the conclusions, I'll talk a bit about disputes in and out of the jam scene, as well as the spectrum of jam bands. And that's really what the answer is. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking about the spectrum of jam bands right now, from non to jam. Here's a very loose genre call out of this spectrum. So non-jam, pop, most country, like pop country, R&B, punk, techno, most classical, some folk. Again, any structured music with little to no soloing, or there's one solo and that's it. Next, slightly closer to jamming, straight ahead rock, some metal, house, some funk, blues, some folk. There's far more soloing and improv and variation, but again, within mostly structured songs. You can kind of say that that's where Pearl Jam sits, let's say. Jam rock. This is again closer. Jam rock, but not being a jam band, rock that jams. I will be mentioning some of those jam rock bands in the context of these different eras that we're going to go through. Some metal is more jammy. Bluegrass, for sure. EDM can be very much like that. Deep funk, for sure. Progressive rock and progressive, music of all kinds can fit into this. Some jazz as well. Lots of soloing. Lots of room for variation, which is often baked into the recorded and live song structures, but still punching certain structural elements, punching the card there for those elements. So not 100% jam adjacent. And again, I'll be mentioning some of these in the history. And then finally, jam bands and jazz and fusion are jam. That's jam music right there. Meant to rely solely on jamming, with the structure just being a suggestion, just there to kind of add as a jumping off point. And studio recordings are often an afterthought. So now that we have down where jam bands come from, what they are, and what elements are and aren't necessary, let's get into history proper, the history of jam bands. Before we do the timeline here, a few general notes. One note is, we're not at the halfway point, even though we're getting close to the 30-minute mark. I think I'm probably going to cut this more at 40, because that's about how long this episode will be, twice that long. There are well over, as I said before, 250 jam bands with known names, meaning with enough recognition to be notable, and only from the Western world, because it's far more likely that there have been tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of jam bands throughout the entire world, especially if you're loosely defining.
Blown. And it takes a lot for that.
Wow. I didn't know I could blow Scott's mind with anything. Run the range these bands do. I don't know why it sounded like Yoda there. From jazz to rock to country to funk to folk to bluegrass to blues to even dance and electronic music and beyond. We're going to get into all those in the history. There's no one genre that jam bands adhere to, as I said before, and depending on who you listen to and how you group, there have been anywhere from 4 to 6 generations of jam bands. I'm going to go with 4 for this, just to keep it simple. Please, if you think that I love to divide things up that way, it's how I said there's been more than 2 British invasions or whatever. People say there are more than 3. I think that we're in the middle of a 5th one, whatever. I like those distinctions, and they're fun to justify as well. I'm going with 4 because experts in the field have most used 4. But if you think there were fewer or more, generations of jam bands, just please let me know. You probably know better than I do. Ain't no way I can list them all. So my list, as usual, will be a survey of the bands. I believe I do 6 for each era. And you can tell me if I miss significant ones, and I know Scott will probably tell me too, since he knows way more than I do. I won't go too deep into any bands because of time. And the final note is that, yes, I will be asking Scott for his opinion on some of these bands. Actually, what I'm going to do, I think, is just give Scott the floor at the end of each era to kind of let him weigh in, since jam music is not my thing. Is you good with that, Scott?
Blue. I said blue, not aqua. Dude, you'll have to untwangle that ear scrotum and listen to me. Blue cookies. Like 16 of them. You give me, make it a baker's dozen. Even more. And throw in the aqua too, sure.
Scott is busy conducting business. So let's get into the 4 generations of jam bands. Number 1, the pioneers, the 60s and 70s. The sound here is psychedelic rock, jazz fusion, southern blues rock, big time, and avant rock. And the legacy here is that these bands established the foundation of the jam band scene by breaking away from strict radio edits, embracing extended improvisational live shows, and fostering a grassroots community. So many key elements here that these bands established. Who were the bands and the jam adjacent bands? And again, you know, your mileage may vary. You may dispute me on this. That's okay. Then dispute me. Number 1, I'm going to go with Frank Zappa in his various iterations. He started professionally in 1955, and right up until his death in 1993, he was always, or mostly, deliberately outre, avant, and weird, and thus came up with both a bunch of music and a whole lot of genius and innovation, which we'll talk about that kind of risk, risk of failure later. It was one strain of jam that didn't rely strictly on Southern music, blues music, country music, and let the world know that you could jam on anything, in any way, with any kind of instrumentation, even in the midst of composed music. A few years ago, believe it or not, I listened to Zappa's entire catalog, and I even did an acoustic version of This Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama live online. You can find it on this here channel, youtube.com/appmusic. It's not a genre. Discography, 62 albums with and without the Mothers of Invention. 9 hit the top 40. Notable ones being We're Only In It For The Money, which hit number 30 in 1968. That was the takeoff cover of Sgt. Pepper. Joe's Garage, Act 1, which hit number 27 in 1979. Chic Your Booty, love that one. The whole disco thing, number 21 in 1979. And Apostrophe, number 10 in 1974, was highest charting. Lots of singles, but the only ones that have any significant U.S. chart success are Dancin' Fool, which is his disco send-up from 1979, which hit number 45, and Valley Girl with his daughter Moon in 1982, which hit number 32, his only top 40 hit, and the only one I probably knew from him for probably years and years, till probably the 90s. Next band. Stop me if you've heard this band. Grateful Dead. Who were from 1965 to 95, of course, ended when Jerry Garcia died, though also, of course, a ton of spin-off bands that continue to this day, even after the death of Bob Weir. And I will cover Bob Weir's death and other people, whoever has died this year. And my end-of-year wrap-up, Death is Dumb, which will be, towards the beginning of season 9 in December. Is there any doubt that the Grateful Dead started all of this for real? They, of course, could warrant an entire podcast dedicated to them. I'm sure they're out there, let alone an episode or two, and I may do a couple of episodes on them next season if I can find the time to listen to all their music, as I like to do that first. I would have to know more than just Truckin' and Touch of Grey. Now, I know a few more, but yeah, the bands who influenced them were a proto-jam and not jam proper. People like Blue Monroe with Bluegrass. Bill Monroe, did I say, or did I say Blue Monroe? I don't remember. Miles Davis and Coltrane, folk and blues musicians, rock bands like the Stones, other San Francisco-based bands. The Dead set forth forever what it means to be a jam band, and many would say haven't been surpassed.
Point of order, I have to disagree. Lots of jam bands since then have done some amazing things, but none have done it better.
No, actually, that's what I just said. You know, I'm agreeing with you.
Oh yeah, then total agreement.
Good. Okay, that's settled.
Yep.
Discography, of course, the bootlegs are what's key here, but since I'm kind of a recorded music fanatic, I'll mention that they released 22 albums from 1967 to 90, 13 studio and 9 live, many of which hit the U.S. top 40. Wake of the Flood in 73, From the Mars Hotel in 74, Blues for Allah in 75, and In the Dark from 87 all hit top 20. And the last one there hit number 6 because of the single Touch of Grey, which was their only top 10 hit at number 9. But of course, singles were far from the point of any of these jam bands. That's kind of part of the jam culture, is that singles are far from the point. That said, I know far more of their songs than I realize, and probably far more from them than just, I think, any other jam band, frankly. We'll do a couple more here. Santana, 1966 to present. One of only 2 bands in this era to have stayed together ever since forming. Of course, Santana's a guitar god. It's part of the San Francisco scene as well. It's likely the one band from this era as well known by non-jam fans as jam fans, if not more so. And I'm sure a lot of jam people would say Santana's not a jam band. And I understand. I get it. But they're jam adjacent. Discography, 26 studio and 8 live albums from 69 to 2021 so far. Too many top 10 to name. In fact, too many top 5. So number ones are Abraxas in 1970, Santana 3 in 71, Supernatural in 99, and Shaman in 2002. But really, almost every one of their albums has been a hit. I have their greatest hits on both cassette and CD. So I know many of their big songs, including the number 9 Evil Ways from 1969, Black Magic Woman, which hit number 4 in 1970, Oye Como Va, which hit number 13 in 1971, several, I know you like that, Scott, several other top 40 songs, and then 4 later career top 10 hits. Smooth with Rob Thomas in 1999 hit number 1, Maria Maria with Wyclef Jean in the same year hit number 1, The Game of Love with Michelle Branch hit number 5, I didn't put a year there. I think it was 2001. Why Don't You and I with another featured artist. Carlos Santana was one of the first to really figure out that if you put younger featured artists with you, you could, bam. And then so many people did it after that. That song hit number 8 in 2003. Next, Allman Brothers Band from 1969 to 76, 78 to 82, and 89 to 2014. Dwayne and Greg Allman, of course, as well as Dickie Betts and so many others. One of the many incredible Southern rock bands that dominated the 70s. Leonard Skinner's probably the one you would mention first, and the one I was most into at the time, along with another one I'll mention soon. And while I haven't gotten into many of the Southern rock revival bands, I was into some of the biggies from this era, though. After the era, you can say that if not for Southern rock, jam band music wouldn't be what it is and would not have thrived. And that's because Southern rock is jam adjacent more than jam. Tons of jam in there, but a lot of people wouldn't necessarily consider them jam bands, even the Allman Brothers, although you can't get much closer. Discography, 12 studio and 7 live albums from 1969 to 2004. 4 of them hit the top 10. Eat a Peach, which is the one I always mention. It's the only name I know album-wise. Number 4 in 1972. Brothers and Sisters, number 1 in 1973. Win, Lose, or Draw, number 5 in 75. And Enlightened Rogues, number 9 in 79. So many great songs that they had, including Sweet Melissa, but only 3 hit the top 40. Straight from the Heart hit number 39 in 1981. Crazy Love hit number 29 in 1979. And Ramblin' Man, Lord, I was born a rambling man, hit number 2 in 1973. We're going to finish this section out before we take a break. And that next band that is jam adjacent but still seminal is Little Feat. 1969 to 79, took a break, and then 87 to present. I remember when they got back together because I happened to have been into them at that time. Lowell George was the big one there. I was into them pretty heavily in college, and neither before nor since, but I fully respect them and love their sound because of the dang horns. They were basically one of a handful of bands I got into because I loved Chicago so much, and I was looking for bands that used horns, so Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Little Feat. Like with Santana, many jam band fans would say they're not really a jam band, and I understand that. Discography, 17 studio and 14 live albums from 1971 to 2021. Their run from 74 to 79 all hit the top 40, as did their comeback album in 88. The highest was the 1978 live album Waiting for Columbus at number 18. They had also so many great songs. The one that I've always liked the most is Dixie. If you'll be my Dixie chicken, I will be your Tennessee lamb. Didn't chart. Hate to Lose Your Lovin' did hit 80 in 88, top 40, and Texas Twister in 1990. Both of those hit number 1 on the U.S. main, and several others were in the top 40. We're going to go with one more band here, and that is Hawkwind. 1969 to present, British. Dave Brock's the big guy here. Let's not forget Lemmy Kilmister was their lead singer for a while before he formed Motorhead, based on the name of a song by Hawkwind. The British contingent of jam, as I said, leaning heavily psychedelic, though running a broad stylistic range. They inspired Spinal Tap, one of the things that did, and the idea of excess in rock. Probably helped to bring on punk, too. Again, jam adjacent, more than jam, but close enough. The discography, 35 studio albums and 13 live albums up to 2025, so they'll probably put another one out. Only 3 hit the lower reaches of the U.S. charts, but in the UK, they had 13 top 40 and 5 top 20 albums, including Warrior on the Edge of Time, which hit number 13 in 1973. Quite a few singles through 2016. Silver Machine was their highest charting, Lemmy being the lead singer there, hit number 3 1972 in the UK. In looking for each era, I wanted to find more obscure jam bands. There weren't actually that many bands you could strictly classify as jam bands in this first era. There were a bunch of jam-adjacent bands, Southern Rock and some of the ones I mentioned. Moreover, a ton of super influential jazz fusion bands like Weather Report and Mahavishnu Orchestra and etc. So there's a lot of that going around, but not a lot of actual proper jam bands. So I'm just going to stop right here.
Wait, that's it? What about Mountain Bus? Hot Tuna? Man!
First of all, I was going to get to you, but man what?
No, I'm talking about the Welsh jam band Man, who BT dubstep are still around, psychedelic space rock extraordinaire. I'm going to keep my eye on you, Nicholas. Mental Scrotum.
Okay, noted. And
Untwangle.
No, I didn't have those on my list, so that was actually valuable contribution. Thank you, Scott. All right, and with that, we are going to take that long-awaited mid-roll break with this unnaturally long history of jam bands, and we will be right back. Hey, MxG fans, thank you as always for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast. Watchers, go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre if you would rather just listen. And everyone, please take some time out to go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to support this podcast, my band rec, and everything I do for as little as $1 a month. Speaking of everything I do, nickdimatteo.com really does have it all. If you're interested in unique and quirky t-shirts that I've all personally hand designed, go to nickdimatteo.com/shop and you can find it all there, including discounts if you sign up for my newsletter or Patreon. If you're someone who's always wanted to write a song, has just never figured out how to get there, let me work with you. I am the Song Coach. Go to nickdimatteo.com/thesongcoach, and whether you're a complete beginner or completely advanced, I can get you there. You can book a free 30-minute call right there on the site. And of course, I am always releasing new music. Go to nickdimatteo.com/music to find it all. My complete discography is there. All of the social links are there. And of course, please like, share, subscribe, rate, review. Do it for the podcast. Do it for the music. Sharing is especially valuable to all of us indie creators. I really appreciate your support, your eyes and ears. Thank you for hanging with me for this mid-roll, and let's get back to the show. All right, we are back from the mid-roll.
And we will be right back after these massages.
No, Scott, we already had the break. We're back already.
All right. Okay. Okay, no bogue.
And so we are back, and we are now into the next era, the second of 4 eras, and that is the Phish era and Horde. The Horde era from the 80s into like the early mid-90s, let's say the mid-90s. The sound here, Progressive rock, bluegrass, and funk really enter into the picture, along with everything else that had already existed. The legacy, after somewhat of a lull in the scene in the 80s, it was brought on by both changing tastes and the punk backlash, as well as disco, new wave, electronic, hip-hop, different interests, which we'll get to those later, actually, in this history. The late 80s and early 90s saw a massive explosion in the scene. Acts like Phish followed the Dead's template and built massive followings through tape trading and independent touring, eventually leading to the creation of traveling summer festivals like the Horde Festival, which stands for Horizons of Rock Developing Everywhere. Didn't know that till I researched this, which ran from 92 to 98. In fact, I'd say that jam band music, especially to outsiders, was for a while only the Dead and whatever regional copycats there were, until Phish came along and showed that another big band could be as successful as the Dead in doing this. There was a friend of mine in acting school, college, Mason Gross, who actually followed the Dead and Phish, and freshman year dropped out of college to do just that. Not naming names because he was a very cool guy. I don't know why he had hair kind of growing out of the bridge of his nose. That might be a condition. I believe that there's a name for that. I don't exactly remember why or what that was. In my idiot brain as a teenager, I thought it was because of the drugs he took. I very much doubt that was true. So even though I never said anything because I'm not that kind of person, I'm sorry for even thinking it. Further, if not for this second wave of jam bands, the music would have been an era-specific footnote. That is my contention. So Phish played a huge part in keeping jam band ideals alive. Speaking of the bands, Phish started in 1983. Still going after just a couple of short breaks there and here and there. Trey Anastasio and certainly other people who've been with the band since pretty much the beginning. Again, I knew these guys mainly because they were college mainstays and were pretty popular in the 90s, but would be hard-pressed to name a song or an album. They lean more funk, alt, progressive, even jazz than the usual Southern rock jam sound, although there is an element of that too. Their discography, 16 studio and 13 live albums from 1989 to this year. 9 top 20 albums. The biggest was Billy Breathes, number 7 in 96, and subsequently Fuego, number 7 in 2014. That is a 20-year gap. Number 7 is good for them. Many singles, of course. Only 2 of them hit the U.S. main, Down with Disease and number 33 in 1994. And Free, number 11 in 96. I do remember those were both on modern rock stations, so I remember them. Next band, Widespread Panic, 1986 to present. More of, before I say that, John Bell, Michael Hauser, among other members. And again, these are surveys of the band, so I'm not going to deep histories for either of them. You can look up who the other members were and all the other details you'd like to know. But this is a list to say, hey, look these up, and to send some information. They did have more of a Southern and blues rock sound. Definitely have known about them for decades. I remember hearing about them maybe even in the late 80s, but definitely in the 90s. Never really tuned into them, though. Discography, 13 studio and 7 live albums. Bombs and Butterflies hit number 50 in 1997. And several later ones reached the top 50 as well. Lots of singles. Hope in a Hopeless World, number 13 mainstream rock charts in 1997. I don't know if I remember it. I listened to it again. I don't know if I remember it. Speaking, I don't know why I said that. Blues Traveler is the next band, 1987 to present. From Princeton, New Jersey, John Popper, friends with the Spin Doctors. They used to tour with them, and maybe I think did recently as well. Harmonica, John Popper with that improv harmonica. Enough hits to be known outside of the jam band circuit. Blues, folk, alt, and southern sound. Also, pretty damn consistent lineup through the years. Some people may say they're jam adjacent. It's up to you. Discography, 15 studio and 3 live albums through 2023. The biggest were Straight On Till Morning, number 11 in 97, and 4, number 8 in 1994. Quite a few singles hit the U.S. adult alternative charts or main charts. Only 2 hit the U.S. singles chart, both in 1995. Hook, number 23. Which I've heard that so often in stores in the last 2 years. And Runaround, number 8. It hit in number 8, and that's my preferred of the 2. I like Runaround better than Hook. All right, next one. Colonel Bruce Hampton and the Aquarium Rescue Unit. Sometimes together, sometimes not. Mostly not. 1988 to 97, 2004 to 2007, and then a little reunion in 2015. Colonel Bruce Hampton died in 2017. Way more on the southern jazz fusion side of jam. This band, again, worked with and without the Colonel and were popular at Horde. Known pretty much only by jam band people. I had never heard of them. Discography. Looks like 3 studio and 2 live albums. Hard to, I couldn't find all of the information I wanted. The notable, their eponymous debut in 92 and Mirrors of Embarrassment in 93. I could not find a list of singles, but I listened to them, and my favorites are Hurt No More, which is without the Colonel, which funks it, the funk, up. Most of the rest of their stuff, was more kind of southern feel. Which is, although again, I've been into Southern rock and certain other elements of that kind of music, not necessarily my jam. Mo, 1980, that's Mo with a period, all lowercase, 1989 to present. Rob Durhack, Chuck Garvey, and others. More of a neo-psychedelic and prog rock sound, which is very cool. Another one that's just known pretty much only by jam band people. I had never heard of them. Discography, 14 studio and 10 live albums through last year. The big ones were No Doi in 1996 and The Conch in 2007. No significant singles to speak of, but their highest streaming single is Nebraska from Tin Cans and Car Tires in 1998. Another good album. And they have a nice sound. I like their sound. Speaking of sound, Dave Matthews Band, 1991 to present. I'm sure some jam band people would say this is a jam adjacent band. That's totally fine. With as many hits as he had, they might be right, but they are well known for jamming and have played in the jam circuit. They mix jazz, folk, indie, alt, and heavy roots rock. Fairly consistent lineup all these years. Of course, one of the big indie sensations of the 90s and the 2000s, actually. Discography. From 94 to 2023, they've released 10 studio albums and a whopping 85 live albums.
What? For real?
Yeah.
Oh, I swear to God, I've only heard like 63 of them. I got to catch up, man.
That's a job for you. Scott, you can go ahead and catch up with those other 22 that you missed. The first album hit number 11, and all the others hit top 5, with seven of them hitting number 1 through 2018. Of any of these bands, they're probably far more known for their singles. But let's not forget, when I did my album series and was in the 2000s, there were several years where their albums, again, were at number 1. And it surprised me because I always associated them with the 90s. But no, huge success in the 2000s as well. They had 9 adult alternative number 1s. And also, What Would You Say? First single. Hit number 5 on U.S. Main in 1994. And, of course, Crash Into Me, which was only number 2 adult alternative hit. Interesting. Had 4 top 40 hits on the U.S. proper chart. So Crash Into Me was not on the U.S. proper chart. Where Are You Going? Hit number 39 in 2002. Funny the Way It Is hit number 37 in 2009. The Space Between, which I know very well, hit number 22 in 2001. And American Baby, their highest charting on the main charts, number 16 in 2005. You might also know Tripping Billies. Hit number 6 adult alternative in 1997. And Satellite hit number 7 adult alternative in 1995. So unlike in the first era, there were actually a ton of lesser-known jam bands, as well as jam-adjacent bands like Spin Doctors mentioned before. Also, Rusted Root, Primus were jam-adjacent, did a lot of jamming. But again, I can't name them all, so I will stop here. Scott?
Oh, yeah. Nick, all ass. No, the ominous sea pods, no leftover salmon. Come on, dude.
Yeah, sorry. No. I'd never heard of those, and sorry I didn't cover them. But you can, if you want to do a podcast yourself, never mind. I think he's sleeping again. So, third era, Jamtronica and Transfusion. And yes, you heard me right. That's Transfusion. fusion, not transfusion, late 90s to the 2000s, through the 2000s. The sound here in this third generation is electronic-infused rock, funk jazz, and neo-soul, again mixed in with everything that came before. The legacy, this wave was heavily inspired by the second generation, but innovated by weaving in electronic music, EDM, techno, and heavy progressive rock structures into their improv sets. You could say that, like so much musical evolution, a genre starts with black music, gets co-opted and or adopted lovingly by whites and others, becomes itself super freaking white, and all the money goes to the whites, and etc., and then eventually starts to morph again to include more black music influences as well as actual ethnic diversity in their ranks of musicians themselves. So kind of full circle, and usually that full the coming back around to the circle, things are far better for everyone involved than they were at first. Also, a cool thing to note here, and I really love this kind of connection, the jam prog dance connection. I've read more than once that the 1970s, there was a crossover most of us forgot or never knew, and that is the connection between prog rock and disco. If you think of jam as stemming from all of the pre-stuff I mentioned in the prehistory, including jazz, there was already a progressive element to it, which I think eventually birthed or at least informed the birth of progressive rock itself and other progressive forms of music, pop music, and prog played a huge part in turning funk and music like that, dance music, into the extended disco and dance sets and mixes in 12 inches. Because prog said, hey, you can do extended stuff. You can do it for the audience who wants long songs. They want to lose themselves in the music, lose themselves in the dance. And that's what prog did, that's what jam did, and that's what disco did. And not to focus too intently on any specific part of the song, except for a hook here and there, vibe rules. And so as we get into some of the bands in this developmental era, keep in mind it's actually very related and organic that some of them are dance, trance, electronic based. This is not a weird thing. This is, to me, connected to the very beginnings of jam music, even though some of them do also continue to use roots rock and jazz styles. So the bands. The String Cheese Incident, 1993 to present, with one small break. Another one of those bands I'd always heard of, but never really heard. Bill Nershi, Michael Kang, etc. Progressive, bluegrass, neo, psychedelic, jam, rock, electro, country, funk, jazz, Latin, reggae, and more. Probably unlike any band you've ever heard, which I love that amalgam. Discography, they had 11 albums through 2023, including Outside Inside, which hit number 147 in 2001, Untying the Knot, N-O-T, which hit number 157 in 2003, and Song in My Head, which hit number 123 in 2014. Charts not their thing and not necessary to be their thing. Again, none of the singles have also charted, but their highest streaming song is Sirens from Untying the Knot. It is funky, it is moody, it is a great sound, and of the stuff I've heard from all the bands I've mentioned so far, it's probably my favorite, though I do like some of the things I've mentioned, like the Dave Matthews and Blues Travelers and a couple of Phish songs and Grateful Dead songs. There are things in there, but as far as sound, so far this is my favorite. I know that will change. Government Mule, 1994 to present. Southern blues rock revivalist, especially since they're basically spun off from the Allman Brothers in the late 1980s. Warren Haynes et al. One of those bands I, again, always heard of, but never really heard. Always respected them, though. You know them if you know jam bands, and enough of my friends were into that I had heard of them frequently. When you're friends with people who are music heads or musicians, you're going to hear about stuff that even you're not into, and that's actually a really cool thing. They were more mentioned even during the My Morning Jacket era, just a decade and a half ago, let's say, as they worked and toured with them. Discography, 26 albums live and studio. 3 were in the top 40. Revolution Come, Revolution Go hit number 35 in 2017. By a Thread hit number 34 in 2009. And Shout hit number 32 in 2013. I don't know much about the singles they released, if any, but their highest streamer is Soul Shine from 2001's The Deep End Volume 1. And you can hear the Allman Brothers influence hugely. Next band, Disco Biscuits, 1995 to present. Mark Brownstein and others. Philly from the University of Pennsylvania. And that's probably why I've known about them since the 90s, because they were a hometown band. Trance fusion, live tronica, and trance is really their thing. But I got to be honest, they also hear a lot of Southern rock and the Zappa influence in here too. And that's one of the cool things about jam bands, which to me is related to certainly a bunch of other music and musicians, but not quite as much as in those other genres, to where they're so willing to just combine shit in ways that are, if not unique, it's sometimes unique, but often surprising and fun and welcome. Discography of the Disco Biscuits, 7 studio albums, 6 live albums through 2024. I would start with Senor Boombox from 2002. Song-wise, I really like On Time from 2010's Planet Anthem. Umphreys McGee, 97 to present. Again, another one of those bands I had heard of, but never heard their music that I know of. They're more prog and alt rock. Brendan Bayliss and others started the band. They also mix in, though, metal, funk, jazz, blues, reggae, bluegrass, country, folk, electronica. So again, really eclectic. Funk rock pop is really what stands out for me as far as the version of their sound that I really like. They also did a full album of mashups that's insanely cool. 2016's Zonkey. So look up Zonkey. Discography, 12 studio and 10 live albums through 2025. Their highest charting have been Similar Skin, which hit number 49 main, number 14 indie in 2014, and It's Not Us, which hit number 43 main and number 7 indie in 2018. Not a lot of official singles, but as far as listening, I really like In the Kitchen from 2004's Anchor Drops and No Diablo from Similar Skin. It's giving you places to start. Another band, STS9, Sound Tribe Sector 9 from 1997 to present. Instrumental live tronica, kind of jam adjacent, mixing rock and funk and jazz and drum and bass, psychedelica, I like to say, and hip-hop. Hunter Brown and others started the band. I call them jam adjacent, but they're in a lot of the jam kind of circuit. So you tell me what they are. They are the most electro I've heard so far, and likely the kind of jam music I would most create if I did that. In fact, the featured song has elements of what you're hearing in STS9. So stay tuned, please, for the featured song. I think you'll get a kick out of it. Discography, 11 studio albums, 2 remix albums, and multiple live releases. I would start with Artifact from 2005 and then go to Peace Blaster from 2008 and Ad Explorata from 2009. I have to think they create an incredibly awesome vibe live. I really like the song Golden Gate from When the Dust Settles EP, and Scheme also from that EP, and World Go Round from The Universe Inside from 2016. Those are my favorites of theirs. The band Lotus, 1998 to present, Luke Miller and others. Mostly an instrumental band, not all, but mostly. Very on the electronic dance and live tronica jam band clip. Of every band I've profiled so far, this is, again, so far, the only one I would want to see live. Lotus has a great sound. Discography, 21 albums, I believe, through this year. Start with Nomad from 2004 and goes to Strength of Weak Ties in 2006. Their highest streaming song is Colorado from Nomad. It's very mellow, very ambient, but all the rest of their highest streamers are super funky, incredible kind of retro electro. And I love the song Stranger Danger. As with so many genres, that's it for that third generation. The lesser knowns and subgenres eventually propagate beyond number, and that's what happened in this era. It's been either on the traditional side, Southern rock, jazz, blues, bluegrass, etc., or the trance and electronica side, or a mix of the two. But again, that was my 6. I'm going to stop here. Scott, handing it over to you.
Of course you are. Of course you're stopping here. Totally glossing on Perpetual Groove, Brothers Past, also from Philly, Philly boy, and rock.
Yes, I'm a Philly boy, and rock, is that R-A-Q?
Rock
That's
is
the
my
band
favorite.
that's spelled R-A-Q, all caps?
R-A-Q is my favorite.
Thank you. Good. I don't know why you need to make this so contentious. I think you maybe need to, just grab some cookies or something like that. That might help you, right? But anyway, thank you. Those were actually good additions to the list. And let's get to the final era here. Number 4, the modern festival scene and streaming from the 2010s to present. The sound here is a melting pot of indie folk, groove-heavy funk, bluegrass, and ambient rock, and everything that came before. Like all of modern music, all of modern jam band music represents every kind you can think of at the moment. Traditional Southern of all kinds, funkier versions, neo-grassroots and bluegrass, like Billy Strings, trance and electronic, psychedelic, and you name it. Pick it, it's in there. The legacy here, the current era blends, again, traditional and grassroots tour-heavy jam aesthetic with the modern festival culture, which does lean into kind of more of the electronic, highly polished, songwriting-focused improvisation. So there seems to be more focus on songs in the modern era than usual, but all still very much focused on vibe. You have to be. The bands. Twiddle. 2004 to 2023, they're kind of a reggae and funk jam band. Mihaly Savvalidis and Ryan Dempsey and others. They're now on an indefinite hiatus. Honestly, couldn't think of a better name for a jam band than Twiddle, except for maybe Noodle. Or wank. No, that was harsh. Scott, don't say anything. I know. We'll talk about it later. Very 90s reggae rock mixed with some jazzy folk stuff. Nice sound overall, honestly, even if not quite my sound. Discography, 7 albums with plump chapters 1 and 2 considered their high watermark. I like the songs Lost in the Cold and Indigo Trigger from those albums. Another band, Dopapod. 2008-2024, progressive metal, funk, fusion, and country, among others. Eli Winderman and Michelangelo Karuba and others. They're compared to Phish, Disco Biscuits, and Zappa, and honestly can hear all of that in there. All of it. You can see inspired by them. Just neat. I always think it's better to be inspired by more than one thing. Otherwise, you're just retreading. And I feel like a lot of musicians who want to remain loyal to their supposed genre overlook that fact. Jam bands don't. Discography, 9 studio and 5 live albums, with their self-titled 2022 album considered their best. Looks like they released 10 singles maybe. Present Ghosts from 2014's Never Odd or Even is really nice. Really like that. Another band, Pigeons Playing Ping Pong from 2009 to present. A funk jam band from Baltimore. Greg Ormont and others. I forget he has a nickname. I didn't write it down. Very, very, very mid-'80s funk rock, kind of like Thelonious Monster and early Chili Peppers. Discography, 8 studio and 3 live albums. I would start with 2014's Psychology and then go to 2017's Pizzazz with one missing Z. Definitely like the later stuff better as they settled, I think, into better writing. But overall, kind of not my jam, pun intended. Don't say anything, please, Scott. Though the horns on 2025's Feed the Fire album are very nice, which is why I think I like better the direction they're going. Spafford, 2009 to present, rock, funk, jazz fusion, reggae, ska, electro pop, all mixed in there. Nice mix. Brian Moss and Jordan Fairless and others, they like to do long transitions between songs during their live sets. We talked about this earlier. Generally, I like their sound better than Twiddle and Dopapod and Pigeons Playing Ping Pong, if only because I like the vocalist better. But again, none of these are like right in my wheelhouse sound-wise. Discography, 7 studio and 12 live albums through this year, with 2018's For Amusement Only considered one of their best. As far as songs, Ain't That Wrong from that album is really nice, but honestly, their live cuts, I think, are better overall than their recorded ones, which stands to reason. And then, finally, we have, and you were waiting for me to mention this, jam people, Goose, 2014 to present, from Berkeley, Rick Miratanda and Ben Atkin and others. They're currently the Phish of this era. Everybody is talking about them as yet another savior of rock.
You could even say that Goose is the geese of jam bands. Now your mind's blown.
Yes, actually, I was just about to say that. Yes, everybody talks about Geese. They also talk about Goose. Is that a coincidence that there are two bands named after a pretty wretched and annoying bird? I don't know. Hopefully the music doesn't reflect that. Prog, funk, psychedelic, indie rock contingent. They have performed with the bigs like Trey Anastasio, Bob Weir, Dead and Company, Dave Matthews. So they've basically been crowned heirs to the throne, I think. They call themselves indie groove rather than jam. We're actually going to get into in the conclusions the disputes, which is a common thing I've mentioned before, but we'll get there. Discography, 6 studio albums and already 17 live albums. Insane. I would start with 2022's Dripfield and then do Everything Must Go from 2025. They've had 7 singles through this year. Again, singles are not the main thing here, but as that's just kind of where I sit, I like to mention this because it also gives you kind of a quick way to get into them and listen to them. I like their sound in general. It's a very kind of late 70s, early 80s, one of my sweet spots for production. Funky jazz, rock, pop. It's like if a less cloying Steely Dan mixed with a less pop Hall & Oates and then jammed. Good to Be from this year's Big Modern is a really good, fun song. So Ready from 2021's Shenanigans Nightclub is also really good. And I lied, I've got one more band, and that is Rose City Band. 2019 to present, Ripley Johnson and others, they formed to explore, get this, 70s cosmic country and psychedelic folk sounds. Already interesting to me. Very dreamy, ambient country sound. Very 70s, so kudos for nailing that exploration, and in a way that to me is not very often heard. Discography, 5 studio albums. I would start with 2020's Summer Long. I like the song Wildflowers from that. And yes, for a throwback sound, it has a nice atmospheric and just a slightly different take, unlike most throwback Southern rock bands. And I think it's because they're exploring types of music that weren't created that much. How much cosmic country or psychedelic folk do you know? It's kind of a cool thing to do. Also, let's not forget that Southern rock's late 2000s and 2010s revival is stronger than ever with bands like Rose City, Tedeschi Trucks, Billy Strings, Marcus King Band, etc., Alabama Shake. So people like that who do jam a lot on stage, and there are so many I didn't mention in that. It is a huge, huge scene right now.
And let's not forget that you always forget key bands like Dogs in a Pile from your Jersey Shore, dude. Garcia Peoples, also from Jersey. And my current fave, Australia's King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, mostly psychedelic, but jam enough to jam,
Okay. Yes, I know. I said I couldn't mention them all. I already said I'm not going to mention them all. You are providing a valuable service here, Scott, by mentioning things I haven't mentioned before. I would just ask that, again, you maybe find some cookies or something and just do it in a way that's maybe not quite as contentious. I know it's hot in here. Anyway, let's get to conclusions. Taking off from Scott's last, I'll say, comment, the idea here is that jam is that, just like I said in the intro, it's a continuum and broad enough that I guarantee even you will find something to like, even if you don't like jam music. Why do I know that? I'm not a big fan of jam music, and I found a lot that I liked. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that jam music runs the range.
Runs on the range where you can't find a bathroom all day.
And we'll just keep talking over that. You can say that, like me, you're not into jam band music in general, especially if your reference point is the Dead or Phish or bands like that. That is true. I think you can say that validly. I mean, you can say anything, but I'm saying that as far as an opinion, it is very valid to say you're not into jam music because of that, right? Because you associate it with that. But you cannot say you're not into all types of jam band music, because jam band music covers almost all types of music. So you're either not into music at all, or, is what I'm saying. Some of the music you listen to might even have jams, or sound like some of the jam music that I mentioned, whether it's rock or country or electronic or even freestyle rap. Like, there are things in there that become jams and you're not even thinking of it that way. With as rich a history as jam bands and jamming in general has, it's also safe to say it's not going anywhere. And in fact, we've seen that it's being revived by even newer bands as we speak. I would call this, even though I would say it's the fourth generation, as I mentioned, but I would say it's probably the second full revival. I'd go way further and say that most of the music we know and love today would not exist without jamming.
Without jamming, right. Mouth jamming, mouth jamming, mouth jamming, mouth jamming,
Okay, performance, wonderful performance. Yes, music would probably exist without the scene of jam bands, but absolutely not without the exploratory and developmental aesthetics of jamming, and that jam bands popularized and promoted almost as much as jazz did. In some scenes more. And I'd argue with slightly broader genre inclusion than jazz, because jazz has had many periods of purism and growing pains, which is not necessarily a thing in jam bands, though I would say, only slightly, because jazz itself is always changing, and it eventually comes around to including other kinds of music, hip-hop, electronic, rock, country in jazz. And the same, of course, is in jam bands, which of course means the future of jam bands is limitless. Few other conclusions here before I get to my favorite jam bands from each era and featured song and questions. Note 1. I think a huge takeaway is that jam bands are one of the few kinds of art of any kind that almost requires in real life engagement, IRL engagement. And while, yes, you can enjoy the legit recordings and especially the bootlegs, I don't...
Riverport Gen 98, unbeatable.
I'm going to assume that was a bootleg. Live is the thrive for jam bands, and that is both a great counterweight to our isolated digital era and unlikely to change era. It is true that with jam bands, live is the thrive.
Dude, wait, hold the phone. Did you just say live is the thrive?
Is that it?
Okay, dude, if you're not married, we need to go to Elkton, like, right now.
I appreciate that.
All wrong.
Note number 2, the industry. Like with all non-mainstream music, the industry rarely knows what to do with it because it can't classify it clearly enough to know how to market it. It eventually figured out what all of us did, and that is that the live scene was the way to go as opposed to sales or radio, singles, etc. There was a lot of hullabaloo over tape trading. Tapes were a huge disruptor in the 70s and 80s because the industry felt it was being robbed of revenue. And again, with CDRs. Once it was accepted that, like all free trading, there's an acceptable loss in favor of all the free promotion and word of mouth, then the industry settled down and focused more on the live. And once festivals became even more powerful and effective than a handful of bands touring alone, the industry saw that jam bands have one of the most reliable and consistent fan bases of any kind of music ever. That's a huge plus. Note 3, disputes in and out of the scene. So we've gotten all lovey-dovey about jam band culture, but like any music, it's not without its conflict and controversy. So within the scene, there are many bands who do not like to be classified as such because of the negative noodling connotations. That's why that one band said, we're more indie groove than jam. Always interesting to me how frequently musicians and bands push back on labels as if the label itself will somehow limit what they can do or be seen as. I don't care. Call my music whatever you want, does not matter to me. I try to come up with labels that make it easier for people to understand, but I don't care what you call it. Out of the scene, there are many people who would dispute many of the bands on that list that I found. Guaranteed, several of the bands I mentioned wouldn't even be on your jam band list or an experts list of jam bands.
Because the truth is, Steel, you face it, all bands are jam bands. All bands are jam bands. All are on the continuum of jam.
Note 4, does it take an altered state to truly appreciate jam music? I've said this about Pink Floyd, and also recently a restaurant dude did a joke where he said, what did the Grateful Dead fans say when he sobered up? I don't know what. This music sucks.
That's not true, but it's funny.
Oh, God, this is such a long episode. I wouldn't know because I haven't listened to enough music high to judge whether or not it's better high or not, or we need it. I'm sure there are tons of people who appreciate jam band music without being high, but I'm also sure that drugs are a huge part of the culture, and that's no judgment. Absolutely not. And that the experience is probably far better with them than without them. But again, I don't know. You tell me. I think I already know what Scott thinks, so I'm just not going to pause here for that. Does that mean that music has less integrity because it can't withstand the cold light of day? That is a matter of opinion, and I was going to leave it there, but honestly, I have to throw in here, and that is, and no, that in general, most of the music I don't think stands the light of day or measures up, but there has been enough innovation and genius and sublime moments of joy and discovery that all of those far outweigh whether or not an individual song or performance or album holds up to deep scrutiny.
Oh, we are going back to Elton and getting a divorce immediately. I am going to walk off this show eventually.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, to me, that's just the truth. So let's get to my favorite jam bands from each era. The classic late 60s up to about the early 80s era, I got to give it to the Dead. I got to. They were the only one I really knew, and the granddaddies of them all. And Little Feat is a strong runner-up in the jam adjacent category because I was actually into them for a stretch. I have a couple of their albums. In the Horde era, the Phish era, I again got to give it to the mainstay Phish because I knew them and I enjoyed some of their songs at the time. But Dave Matthews, a really strong adjacent runner-up as far as I'm concerned for me. Even though at the time, it's like one of those bands where you're like, aye, enough, but that's why jam band culture bias, which we're going to get into in the bonus MxTRA at patreon.com/music is not a genre, why jam's strengths are also its weaknesses, why the things that make people love jam bands also make people hate them. In the late 90s, 2000s era, my favorite overall era of jam so far, it was hard to pick, but for mainstay, I'm going to go with the String Cheese Incident, and for kind of an alt, I'm going to go with Lotus, hands down, because just sound wise, I like pretty much everything that I heard from them. And the current era, I'm not going to be coy. I'm going to go straight with Goose, and Spafford kind of pulls up the rear on that.
Nick, you want to hear my faves?
Yes, I would love to hear your favorites, Scott.
Let's see. Hold on. Seven Walkers, Acoustic Syndicate, Al and the Trans-Americans, Allman Brothers Band, Amphibian, Animal Liberation Orchestra.
Wait, Scott. Are you just reading alphabetically from the Wikipedia page?
Yep, and only 250 to go. Assembly of Dust, Backdoor Slam, Bad Not Good.
Okay, yeah, okay. Yep, we get it. Yep. Please just look up that list if you want to have an idea of what other bands are out there, jam band wise, and or stay tuned, and maybe Scott will create his own bonus where he just reads that list, although it won't be here. All that said, I should remind you that I'm not a huge fan of this kind of music as a purist or as a pursuit, either as a fan or a musician. As a fan, I appreciate it. I'm actually going to listen to more of it. I liked a lot of what I heard. I do enjoy a portion of live jam shows, but it will never be central to me.
Your loss, Elton.
Yes, I know.
Tomorrow.
As a musician, I find jamming and improv vital to composition and especially to production and arrangements. There's so many things I've found in my arrangements and in my production that came from just messing around. And I also believe, again, that it's crucial for band bonding. And the times when I've been asked to sit in on whatever kind of jam genre, and just last year I did like a 10-minute jam on stage on bass, I have really loved the trip. But it'll never be sticky enough for me to pursue it. It's just true. That said, it has found its way into small bits of my music, especially the songs that have a more psychedelic overtone, since psychedelic and jam are and have been related since the very beginning. Speaking of my music, the featured song, there are a handful of songs of mine that go beyond just having a solo and delve into more of an improv or jam feel. by design because it worked for that song and the intention that I had. The one that comes to mind most readily is from my album, The Sunshine Seminar, Rec's 2015 album. It's called Ripe, and it mixes rock, electro, pop, psychedelic, glitch, and yes, jamming. The solo section is one of the weirdest and least structurally consistent song passages I've ever recorded, and the overall sound is expansive enough to seem like it could have been made by at least one kind of jam band, from that third era in particular. It was a song to my daughter, who was a teen at the time, and I felt like I wanted to convey some thoughts about how to approach life, especially in the midst of her still dealing with the separation of divorce right through all of her life changes, and to give her hope to embrace life and the next phase of the journey. Don't worry. One of the lines is, you'll know when the time is ripe, to move forward into the next phase of life. I also wrote it for myself to hold out hope that she and I would continue to grow together. I will let you know how that turns out. As always, you can stream this. Go to nickdimatteo.com/music and stream it wherever you stream, or I'll put the link in the episode description there to the direct album. And stay tuned to hear it soon.
And don't forget to look up my band's music.
You have a band? Of course you have.
Yes, I do, Nicholas. We're called The Flaccid Clap, and we're playing at Marchand's basement. And whatever corner the van last broke down on, look for our new single, Mouth Jamming is a mouth jamming, recording it right now.
Cool. Mouth Jamming, The Flaccid Clap. Please look that up as well. That will not be at the end of this episode. My song Ripe will be, but I am definitely going to look up that as soon as you're done recording it. Scott? Questions. Are you into jam band music? If so, who's your favorite jam band? What's your favorite era? Were you aware of the elements that went into creating jam band music from the beginning, and how many elements have been included since then? And how far back all these ideas go? Did you know how huge a following it still has?
Wait, I have some questions too.
Go ahead. Shoot.
Okay. Do you remember the time Bob and Phil got into it with Trey when I was like 27? Because if you do, can you tell me where I put my keys that night? I never returned to the house.
We'll do our best to answer that, yes, and I would like to answer all of your questions because, as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for hanging with me for this extra unnaturally long episode, and for my guest, Scott Blaze.
Nick, this has been Scott J. Blaze. Thank you for being on my show. Next week,
I alone will see you next week.
Bye. I
Scott,
will get by. I will survive.
Scott, listen, I have to get to a dinner, so if you don't mind, just, yep.
I will get bye.
Bye.
Time to put out the light and over. Oh, it's been a long, tough fight. This time's over now. For you, it's through. To find the path you're taking, what you have to leave behind, reawake. time is ripe, you'll know. When the time is ripe, you'll know. When the time is right. Stop making